Hey everyone, we're back and we're in the Unwrapping the Pharaohs. We're looking at lesson 10 and I'm calling it Dating Egypt, okay? Not dating as in trying to go out with it, dating as in the dates when things happen, okay? Better clarify that. So let's start with, where we're at. Basically, for the most part, modern day historians say that the historical data for Egypt is a set fact, okay? They claim it as it's there, we know it's there, and there's no errors to it for the most part. There's captions on tombs, etc., for tourists appear, and they seem to be, cut and dry. You look at most history books, and they're going to cement those and say, those are the dates. They want to claim those dates just as accurate, just the dynasties from thousands of years ago are just as accurate as the dates that we have from World War II or the dates we've had for any type of modern history, things that we know for fact happened September 11th, those type of things. They want to claim them just as accurate as those dates. And most books show Egyptian dates as, quote, astronomically fixed. They won't change. Most archaeologists like to think of dates that are set, and any other works that have any type of discrepancies has to be based off of the Egyptian dates and not those dates. And so, but if you start looking at the evidence of some of these things, there winds up being more questions than facts. So when we start talking about looking at other objects or other things, what do we want to look at? The first is source information, okay? The writings of ancient historians. That's where you want to go. Go to the sources. Let's start with Herodotus, right? He was a Greek traveler and historian. He visited Egypt in around the 5th century BC, and he reports what a priest told him, okay? So again, it's not firsthand knowledge. He's writing what he's being told by somebody else who is saying this is what they know. Good information, but not a firsthand knowledge source. And those of you wanting to go to college, and even just in normal sense will know if you can get a first-hand source, it's much better than second or third-hand sources. So then we go to Manetho, right? We've talked about him in other lessons. He's the Egyptian priest from the 3rd century BC, and he was asked to put together a history of Egypt. So, and he was asked this by Ptolemy II, and they wanted it for a library at Alexandria. So he starts going through the records and the history of the pharaohs and everything that he has. He has access to the papyrus. He has knowledge of the language. And this all happens because Alexander occupied Egypt in 332 BC. And it was the end of the Egyptian dynasties. And so he's trying to put together, what happened in this area. And like I said, Manetho has access to the inscriptions, to the documents, to the papyrus. He has working knowledge of the language. But none of, but then with Manetho, we come into two problems, basically. Again, he's looking at thousands of years in the past and is having to rely on documents and writings, and sometimes those writings may or may not be accurate. The other bigger problem that we have with Manetho is none of his writings still exist. Nothing that is written has been found or exists today. But he's only quoted by other people. One of those people that's quoted is Josephus. Josephus is a very famous Jewish historian. He was writing in the 1st century AD, and he starts quoting Manetho often. He also uses the Hebrew Bible and inscriptions and things that are carved into some Jewish temples and statues and artifacts that he has. But again, only a portion of those have been found. And so, he did also look at hundreds of the papyrus documents and things. So you're looking at some problems because we don't have any accurate first-hand sourcing material, which is often the case when you're dealing with ancient history. So here are some of the problems that are pointed out for dating the Egyptian periods and the Egyptian dynasties. Okay, sometimes the kings ruled simultaneously, so the dates were generally added up chronologically. that could be a problem, right? And let me explain it to you. If you have King 1, who they say ruled for 20 years, and King 2 ruled for 20 years. If you add those up, 20 plus 20 would be 40, right? Basic, simple math. The problem, though, is what happens if during that 10-year period, they ruled at the same time, simultaneously? So really, you would only have 30 years of reign there in time period. That changes it by 10 years. And that's just one instance. And this happened occasionally. So sometimes the pharaohs or the kings were successive. They truly reigned for 20 years, and then it ended, and the next one picked up and ruled for 20 years. Sometimes they were contemporary, where they ruled together. So you have two kings ruling at the exact same time for 20 years, example. Or you had some type of combination of the two. One ruled for 20 years, but the last 3 years he ruled in cooperation with the second king, and it becomes a problem because we don't know the information. Usually we're just given, King 1 ruled for 20 years. King 2 ruled for 20 years. However, we have this thing called the Sothic cycle that's proposed by David Rule. He's an English Egyptologist, and he writes a book called The Test of Time, trying to basically solidify the dates of the Egyptians. And he bases this on the Egyptian information that he has and the lunar and solar eclipses. And basically this is his theory, okay? He says the dates are accurate even though every 4 years Egypt's 1 day behind, and after 40 years Egypt would be 10 days behind, and after 1,460 years they're 1 year behind and been back to a starting point. And his philosophy then, or his theory then, is that everything would work out just the way it's supposed to. But there's a few problems with this. The Egyptians were brilliant, right? And they could orient their pyramids within a fraction of a degree of a cardinal point. Literally true north, true south, etc. They were mathematically precise in everything that they built, literally down to millimeters, right? But his theory is claiming that, but they didn't realize they were years off. They could look at the stars, they could align things, they were mathematical geniuses, but they couldn't add time. So that gives some question to this theory, right? So then we have a guy named Peter James in 1991 from Birmingham University, and he writes a different book called Centuries of Darkness. And he disputes this Sothic cycle, and he claims that the dates of Egyptian dynasties need to be reduced and shrunk according to this, period. So, okay, great. We have two competing people saying things are different. One should do one thing, one should do the other thing. And we're not sure what to do at this point. Revising the dates would truly have a profound effect on all of history, especially Egypt history, right? If we're shrinking dynasties or changing things, but if it's not accurate, then it needs to be done. The question is it accurate? Okay? And we're still trying to sort this out. One of the things is that they've looked at is the Hittite Empire, okay? The Hittites had no chronology of their own. They didn't write down their period and their empires or anything like that. We do have a few documents that mention the Hittites, though. One was a letter from the Hittite king Suppilulimus, who was sent to the Egyptian king Akhenaten upon receiving the throne. So basically you have the Hittite king on the throne, Akhenaten, the Egyptian king, comes to the throne, and a letter is sent from the Hittite king to the Egyptian king. It's found among the Amarna letters, and it concludes basically that these two kings reigned at the exact same time, right? Because otherwise, why would you send a letter as the king saying, congratulations on coming to the throne of your country? The problem we start to run into is the Hittites, there's evidence to show they were overrun by the Sea people in approximately 1200 BC, and they had ceased to exist as a nation. The problem then is this. The Assyrian king, Shalmaneser III, there's documents that show the Assyrian king, this man, had an all-out war with the Hittites in the 9th century BC. According to the Egyptian documents, that's 400 years after they died out as a people. which one is it? So there's some confusion, there's some problems. However, if we start adjusting the dates of the Egyptian dates and give, for those reasons we talked about, the kings running, simultaneously and different things, then they would fit the records of the Assyrians and the Hebrew Bible and some other things. So can we justify changing of the Egyptian dates? There are a lot of people and a lot of Egyptologists who say absolutely not. This is set in stone. We've already talked about that some. They're sacred. The chronology is sacred. We cannot change this. We've been using this for 100, 200 years, right? And so everything is set in stone. However, there are starting to be some people who are leaning towards, you know what? Maybe we didn't quite get this right. Maybe we need to adjust and look at some things. The leading person for this is a Sir Alan Gardner. He's a respected authority on Egyptian history, and he himself admits that it's a problem and it needs to be looked at, and we may need to adjust the dates of the Egyptian history. The authors of your book conclude with this, and so will I. So instead of relying on Egyptian history and dates and calculating the dates of neighboring countries on the basis of synchronizing with Egypt, it is essential to consider the evidence from the Assyrians, the Hittites, ancient Greece, and biblical records, and the archaeological ages of Palestine to correctly date the events of Egyptian history. This will inevitably require a reduction of the Egyptian dates. Look at the information, read it, and I'd like you to come up with your own conclusions on what you think. Thanks.